Assalamu alaikum. In today's session with Pak SciComm, we have an honor of having a very well-known, award-winning journalist who has worked for various international newspapers and channels in different capacities. She got into the headlines in 2001 when she was captured by the Taliban. In 2019, she was nominated for Nobel Peace Prize. She was also acknowledged by the United Nations as two of the greatest human rights activists in the history of the world. We have an honor of having Dr. Yvonne Ridley on this session with Pak SciComm, and we'll talk to her about the feminism in Islam and in the Western world. Particularly, we'll talk to her about the rise of Taliban and how this rise is going to affect the feminism in this region. So it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Yvonne Ridley. Dr. Ridley, it's an honor to have you for this session with Pak SciComm.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr. Ridley, to start with, do you see any difference with the feminism in Islam and the Western kind of feminism? Do you see any difference in that?
There is a difference, and of course I'm from the old school of feminism, which really made headlines in the West in the 60s and 70s when women started demanding equal rights. And unfortunately, looking back then, we were so focused on women's rights that we didn't really incorporate our sisters from around the world and sisters in the UK and America. I'm talking about women of Asian origin, women of the Islamic faith, Black women, people of all different faiths and none. We just didn't really, our aims were so narrow and quite aggressive that we didn't really take into account that our behavior might rub up some sisters the wrong way or make it impossible within their cultures for them to join our movement. And to that extent, I look back and regret that we were so focused on trying to get our rights recognized that we didn't consider a lot of women of color, a lot of women from Asian backgrounds with more, it just jarred with a lot of their beliefs, and so I regret that. But when I started reading about Islam as a feminist, I just thought, I want to find out what women's rights are like in Islam, and I was astonished to discover that the rights of Muslim women were already available in Islam. Rights that we have, been fighting for many years were already in existence in Islam. And I'm talking about the right to have a business, the right to run businesses and have separate wealth to a husband, the right to divorce. All of these were available to Muslim women from day one. And yet they hadn't come into the arena of Western women and until the last century, really. And so this was quite astonishing for me, because the Holy Quran makes it crystal clear that as women, we are equal in education, in spirituality, in worth. So this was a surprise for me, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So you have spent your life in the Western world, and then you came to know about Islam. So you have experienced both of these things. So do you think that there is, I mean, being quite honest and quite open about Islam, do you think there are some values that should be incorporated in Islam too? Maybe Allah said it in Islam, and He actually wanted the Muslims to be like that regarding feminism, but actually Muslims misunderstood it, and that is being practiced in terms of women's rights in the West. So do you think any of these things that should be incorporated in modern Islam?
I think there needs to be a great understanding across the board about what feminism means. And it's not about being superior to anyone else. It's not saying that we are better than men, or we hate men, or, you know, there's a great misunderstanding about feminism. And in fact, I remember speaking to a Muslim scholar in Saudi a few years ago, and he was a great promoter of women's rights. And I said, my goodness, you know, you are a perfect example of a feminist. And he was really offended, because this to him was a bit of an insult. So this, and I hadn't meant it as that, I'd meant to flatter him. So Islamic feminism, I'm not sure if it's a contradiction in terms, because women in Islam have had their rights from, you know, the inception of Islam. You know, one of the first things that was outlawed was the killing of baby girls that were considered worthless because of their sex, because they were born, you know, as girls. So this is so Islamic feminism. It's one of those debates. You either accept the term or you don't. But I do think it can shape gender equity, because the Holy Quran, as I say, makes it perfectly clear about the status of women. But if anybody's in any doubt about the status of us all, we just have to read the farewell message of our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he makes it quite clear that we are all equal, regardless of culture, regardless of skin color, you know, and if we are going to be judged, and when we will be judged on our piety and good behavior, which has nothing to do with where we were born or whether we come from a wealthy background or an influential background. You know, we will be judged on our deeds, which is quite liberating itself. So, you know, I think that that if women got to know about their rights in the Holy Quran, they would be able to assert these rights more forcefully, because, you know, there isn't a Muslim man alive who would dare challenge the word of God, which is, of course, what we believe the Quran is, the word of God. And if the Quran is saying you are equal, who on earth is going to say, no, that's wrong? But the only way we can assert our rights is by knowing what our rights are. And that's why I say to a lot of schoolgirls and women that I speak to is, learn your Islam, learn your rights, and enforce them. And when you can enforce your rights with knowledge, nobody will challenge you.
Yeah. Dr. Ridley, you know, there is a conflict between Islamic countries and Western world in terms of definition of feminism. You know, there is always a misconception in the Western world, in the common people in the Western world, that either they don't know about Islam, or whatever they know is negative about Islam. And on the other side, the Muslim people, common people, we actually feel that we are always misunderstood in the Western world. So being in the Western world and being a vocal voice over there, do you think that feminism needs to be redefined, and so that Western world and the Islamic world comes to an agreement on the definition of feminism, and it's in common interest for the people living in the West and in the Islamic world? So do you think that the definition of feminism needs to be redefined?
I think I wouldn't say that we've got it right in the West, because, you know, there was this American preacher called Pat Robertson, and he said that feminism encourages women to kill their children, practice witchcraft, and become lesbians. Now, I mean, those were the views of a Christian minister, and so you know, I think that feminism is misunderstood from east to west. There have been some laws that have just are being proposed in Texas, which in America, which will knock women's rights back hundreds of years. So it's not just that there does seem to be a war on women's rights, and unfortunately, this is from men who seek to control women, and they're not just, you know, unfairly. People say, "Oh yes, well that's Muslim men." You know, it's some of the most empowered women have achieved great things in the Muslim world because they have been encouraged by enlightened men. And when you consider the origins of Islam, it was funded by an international businesswoman, Khadija, who spent all her wealth on promoting Islam and enabling the Prophet, peace be upon him, to be able to deliver the message of Islam. So I think what the problem that women have, and it's been from day one, is that there will be men who will try and control us, who will try and diminish our rights. And the only way that we can enforce those rights is, for Muslim women anyway, is through knowledge and through Islam and being able to assert those rights. As I say, when I started reading what was available to women in Islam, there were rights there from 1400 years ago that didn't come into the gift of Western women until centuries later. So I think that, you know, maybe men from the East need to assert themselves as well and say, hang on, we don't discriminate women against women. Some cultures do. And given the chance, men will try and control women. But I think it's too simplistic to say, yeah, women are fine in the West and they're not in the East.
Okay, being Muslim, we believe that we have got the divine message, and the rights of the women were given 1400 years ago. This is what we claim. But if we talk from the Westerners' point of view, they say that if the rights were given to you by God 1400 years ago, why we can't pinpoint a single Islamic country, or if there are very few Islamic countries. Most of the Islamic countries, they do not have the rights of the women as, I mean, as well established as in the West. Still, they're not. So, what do you think? What is actually a reason? In my opinion, I mean, there are people who say that maybe because not many Muslim women scholars are there. I mean, who can put up their own point of view and who can see Islam with their own eyes as a woman. And there are more than 90% of the scholars, they are men who present Islam, even though they try very hard to present the good face of Islam about women, still they cannot justify it because they themselves are men. So, what do you think about this reason?
You know, this is something that's always mystified me. Quite often I will be asked to go along to schools to present girls with prizes, and sometimes those schools are Islamic, and these girls have been studying Islam. As you know, they emerge in their 20s as scholars of Islam, as students of Islam. Their knowledge is there, and you know, they're absolutely amazing, and I'll give out the prizes and then I won't see them again, and it's like, where do they go? And I asked about this, and it's oh well, that they you know, once they start to have a family and they raise their children, they pass on their Islamic knowledge to the children, and that's where you know, they end up. And I just thought, what a waste, because if anybody can multi-skill, it's women, and especially Muslim women. And I just thought, you know, these young girls that are emerging, that are graduating from Islamic colleges, should be encouraged to go out into the wider community, share their knowledge, and become as visible as the male scholars. And I don't know why this isn't happening. And I remember being told that one of the first universities in the world was started in Fez in Morocco, and that was started by a woman, a Muslim woman, so who was a renowned scholar. And I just think that it's really sad that our girls don't flourish or aren't encouraged to flourish in the same way as male scholars. And I know, you know, I've traveled Pakistan extensively, and there are some incredibly wise Islamic women out there. And we should make sure that they're more visible in the Muslim community, and we should value our female scholars. And this will also inspire, I think, a lot of young girls to think, yes, I want to be a scholar. I want to study Islam more. So, you know, this is something that we certainly need to address, because once you get women being visible in these different, you know, and having a higher profile, then it encourages young girls to look at them as role models and think, yes, I would like to do that, or as well as studying and being good at sciences and maths, maybe I'd like to be as knowledgeable as well in my Islam. So we really need to somehow get these really bright young girls to the front and to be given a platform rather than let them disappear, which is what happens to them largely after they graduate.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Ridley, it wouldn't be fair if we don't talk to you about the Taliban. And I think our viewers would certainly like to hear about, from you about your view about the history repeating itself and the Taliban are in power again. So do you think that this regime, this time, are they different from what they were like 20 years back?
I think they are. I think they've progressed. I think they've matured. And I think that they will govern in a way that will impress people. I hope that's what happens, because, you know, the Taliban Mark I, or the original ones, they were very harsh. Of course, you know, the country had been in a state of collapse. It was lawless. And when they took power, they made the country a lot safer for people just to walk around, you know, and crime came down and there was a lot more transparency and honesty, although those that broke the law were dealt with in a very harsh and public way. 20 years on, I think they will have reflected on the mistakes that they made when they were in government. And this Mark II Taliban, I think, are much more mature and much more wise. And, you know, they've woken up to the fact as well, I think, that the role of women in their society is important and that women should be visible and not hidden away. So I think that they've got a softer approach. I know a few people are disappointed that while they're appointing their senior ministers in government, they've admitted, well, that there won't be any women in the senior posts. But I wouldn't be too despondent about that. You look at the makeup in various parts of the world of governments, and the absence of women in senior roles is glaring. So it's not just, again, something that's happening in the East and it's not happening in the West or vice versa. America has just appointed its first ever female vice president. I don't think they've had a female vice president in their history before. So, and they've never had a woman president. So I wouldn't be too focused on the fact that there won't be senior positions given to women, but we are told that there will be women in government, and it's a start. It's a great leap forward from what happened 20 years ago. So, and as far as I'm aware, women journalists, lawyers, doctors have been told, stay at work, we need you. So I think that that we could be pleasantly surprised by this Taliban Mark II. What I would say, though, is that the eyes of the world are on them at the moment. And imagine the dour work that would happen if they promote Islam in such a beautiful light, where it is abundantly clear the role of women is on an equal level with the role of men. So, you know, everybody's watching them. They've said some fine things. Now let's see them put their words into action. And as I say, I think a few people could be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. Dr. Ridley, you have been a great critic of foreign invasion in Afghanistan, but do you give them some credit of bringing this change in mind of Taliban especially? I mean, 20 years before, they were not like this, and then now you can say that they have matured, but the people from the West, maybe, or the supporter of the invasion, although we believe that they're not many people of the supporter of the invasion, but they would say that it was because of the invasion and the pressure built from the West that have compelled them to give these rights to especially the women and the enlightenment they are going to do in modern Afghanistan. So what do you think about it?
Well, they've had 20 years to reflect on their mistakes. And they've had 20 years to look at how the West has demonized them, has held them to account on women's rights. And, you know, maybe they've looked at their neighbor, Pakistan, where there has been positive discrimination in favor of women in the makeup of the government, in the insistence of having a proportion of guaranteed of women politicians. So, you know, maybe it's finally dawned on them that we have to do this right. You know, there's nothing un-Islamic about promoting women within your ranks. So, you know, I think the one thing that the Taliban will not dilute is their Islam. But I think that they will have consulted many scholars. I think that the fact that some of the leadership has been in exile in Qatar and been exposed to all sorts of Islamic scholars, that they have probably sat down and worked out a balance that they can live with, that other people will find acceptable. I mean, don't forget that the America and Britain's best friends are in Saudi, you know, where women's rights are appalling. They're allowed to drive now, big deal. That, you know, they were hailed as great reformers because they allowed women to drive. Why shouldn't women drive? You know, it was some of the practices that the Saudis do against women are shocking and not Islamic at all. And yet, you know, this is the birthplace of Islam, and the treatment of women is terrible. But that doesn't seem to bother the West too much. So, you know, there's lots of glaring errors and double standards at play. But I do think that the Taliban are genuine about wanting to get it right. And so, you know, it will be interesting to find out who has talked to them or tried to explain to them about women's rights.
Okay, so one last question about that region once again. What do you think, based on your experience, journalism experience, what do you think, how do you see Afghanistan in next 15, 20 years, particularly with regards to the rights of women?
I think that the whole region will lift in terms of women's rights. I mean, at the moment, in recent times, Afghanistan has produced senior women politicians, women in senior roles, women judges. So that has started, and I think it will continue. But of course, most of these women who are in positions of authority are privileged, are wealthy, are in, come from powerful families, which is why they've been able to rise through the ranks. And it's like everything. Once they get comfortable, their power, their achievements starts to filter down and gets out into the smaller cities, the smaller towns, the smaller villages. And I think it'll take about 20 years for this sort of women's rights that we are already seeing in Afghanistan, in Kabul, in Jalalabad, in Herat. I think we'll see women's rights start to spread, or the concept of women's rights start to spread. But it can only happen in an educated society. And at the moment, the education standards in Afghanistan are quite poor. We've had 20 years of Western occupation there. And we were told by George Bush and Tony Blair, we're going in to liberate the Afghan women. 84% of Afghan women are still illiterate. That isn't a success story by any means. They've got the schools, but they haven't got the teachers. Or they've got the teachers, but they haven't got the schools. Internet coverage, something as basic as that, because everything is, advancing online these days, is still only in existence in about 20% of the country. So until Afghanistan is able to recover from 45 years of 2 occupations, famine, strife, civil war, and lawlessness, once it starts to recover, that's when, I think we'll see the status of women start to lift. And as I say, there's some excellent role models next door in Pakistan. You just have to look at the makeup of the government, and there you see women's faces. You go to universities, and there are lots of girls that are rising through the ranks and shattering glass ceilings and being real role models for younger girls who also aspire to achieve great things. So I in 20 years' time, let's come back and have this conversation, and inshallah, it will be a rosier picture.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Ridley, for having such great words for Pakistan. It gives us extreme pleasure. We are a very patriot nation. And thank you very much for being with us. Before going, we would request you, if you would like to have a message for, since you yourself are a very strong advocate of feminism, and you are well represented in the Western country, as well recognized in the Muslim world. So for both the women in the West and in the Muslim world, if you have any message, please go ahead with that.
Well, it's to all those young girls sitting behind a desk being educated at the moment. I would say to them, there is nothing you can't achieve if you put your mind to it. And women are making great strides now. well, Pakistan has already had a female leader, but, you know, maybe America will catch up in the next presidential elections. It's about time we saw women leaders in the West. And I think if we had more women leaders in the West, then life would be much better for countries across Asia and the Middle East. Where you have women prominent in society, you end up with a developed community, a developed society. And, you know, when people talk about the golden era of Islam, where maths, science, engineering, architecture, medicine, all of that, you know, Islam was the pioneer, and Muslims were the world leaders in these fields. During that period, women were visible next to the men. And, you know, we need to return to those days and let's start, you know, developing again. Let's start rebuilding the Muslim world again. And when brothers and sisters are standing shoulder to shoulder, great things can happen. We don't have time for war. We have time to build amazing buildings, to develop, to invent, to create innovation. You know, that's the beauty of Islam.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Ridley, for joining us for this session. You know, it's a great honor for us, great pleasure for us. It was a great session for all of us, and I hope that it serves a purpose we planned this session for. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.